Back with me tonight by popular demand, I'm with John Carman. Hello, John. How are you?
Hi, good evening. How are you doing?
I'm very well. You know, John, we've sort of endeavored to establish a regular show for you on Fridays, but unfortunately, you had a little bit of a medical emergency on Friday. I'm glad to see you're feeling better today. Everything all right?
Oh, yeah, everything's moving right along. I'm healing up on schedule, so hopefully everything will be fine here in the next week or so.
Okay, and for people who weren't with us last week, you've had sort of a dual career with the government. You were in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, and then later you were in the Secret Service protecting presidents. No,
It's the other way around.
Sorry about that.
At age 21, Secret Service right out of college in San Diego.
Wow.
That was into Washington D.C. Now, you know what? That's 1 in 1,500 guys that are qualified applicants get that position, and that doesn't mean your everyday Secret Service guy gets picked up and he works back in D.C. and then works in the White House. That's a totally special category there.
Yeah.
I never think about it, and I don't rub it in, but there's a special qualification. Even regular agents can't just go protecting the president. Okay, they have to have special training. They have to do a special background beyond what they normally would have, and so forth. But then later, I went San Diego PD, private investigator for about a year or so. But I got my license. Then I went back to the Treasury at U.S. Mint in '82 for 10 months, knowing I was going to go into U.S. Customs Service, which was the legacy agency, as they call it. Then later, Tom Ridge screwed it up and did the DHS thing. So,
right. Of course, that was after September 11th.
Yeah, exactly. He took everything and threw it in a big old bowl and stirred it up, and then he walked away, and all he was some governor in some state somewhere, right?
Well, then they made him the director of the Department of Homeland Security, which was an interesting development. I'm going to want to come back to September 11th and speak to you about that, because in the first interview that you and I had done when you appeared on Ole Damagard's show on Patreon, we were talking about how you used to guard the gold in San Francisco. And of course, earlier today, we had an interview with Rick Macy where he was talking about Marsh McClellan, and there's a whole deal with a bunch of gold that was stored at the World Trade Center. But let's save that for later. It's so upsetting to me, John, that you've spent all this time, whether it was in the San Diego PD, the Customs and Border Protection Agency, or the Secret Service, serving the country, and yet you've had so much difficulty dealing with the bureaucracy, just getting the money that you need to live your day-to-day life. So we've started this show in part to promote a Patreon page that people can use to subscribe to you and watch the interviews that we do here. People who go and sponsor John on patreon.com/John_A_Carman are going to get access to that video with Ole Damagard, Light on Conspiracies with Ole Damagard. Of course, people can also see that show on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/lightonconspiracies. But I really do want to encourage people to become sponsors of John's. You can correspond with him on the messaging there on Patreon, and it's going to help him out a lot. This is a guy who has served our country and served several presidents. That's what we're going to focus on tonight, John, is the concept of the power behind the presidency. And of all the guests that I've had on Crowdsource the Truth, you're uniquely qualified to give us insights into this matter, because you have provided security for both Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter, and you've personally encountered almost everyone pictured in this graphic tonight, with the exception of George Herbert Walker Bush. Tell us a little bit about some of these guys and your experience with them.
Well, I guess the only guy would be President Nixon, because even though he left several weeks before I got there and was undergoing training, He did come back once or twice to clean out an old shelf or closet or a couple of boxes with some tapes or something in it. But that's a little joke there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to interject before I skipped over it, was that I do have specialized training in EOD training, so I was also a MAST unit, Metro Arson Strike Team unit.
What is EOD?
Explosive Ordnance Detail. Basically, it's kind of an old military term, but we used it with Secret Service. In fact, I had specialized training at Quantico, Virginia. A lot of people will play that up like, hey, I went to Quantico, I was this, that, and the other, and that's a military base, United States Marine Corps, hoorah. And we had our training from guys down there, just like I went to MCRD or I went to Camp Pendleton here in San Diego County. And all this stuff about the towers and all that stuff, and you made reference to another building in New York. So I've got extra special training and opinions about how that stuff went down. So,
yeah. And Building 7, of course, contained a ton of special, what was in Building 7? It was the Secret Service, the FBI. Who had headquarters in there?
Well, the two main towers had all these other buildings. I don't know if you saw the movie 3 Days of the Condor, which definitely said CIA had offices there. Huh. That was since '74. In fact, that movie was very close and back to the Watergate movie that Robert Redford,
all the President's Men, yeah,
Dustin Hoffman, and all those guys were still filming while I was standing post on a midnight shift right outside 1609 16th Street, which was the Russian embassy back then.
Wow.
They've since moved it to another bigger location. And yeah, I get distracted. You've got such wonderful stuff here. I don't know of anybody else that pulls up their stuff just like you do on screen so that people could see it. It's almost like that Winky Dink thing back in the 50s and 60s where they would put a plastic screen and the kids would take their crayon or their special stencil thing and draw along with the lady on Romper Room or something, you know.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, amazing. So it's like, well, where's the plastic thing so we can put mustaches on these guys or something, right? But yeah, I don't know, a little sidetrack there. But anyway, where was I? Back to Building 7.
Let's talk about Building 7 for a moment, and then we'll get into the presidents.
The movie Die Hard with Bruce Willis, 2 or 3, I think it was, with one of those other sinister German-sounding guys that was going to steal the gold.
Right.
Was specifically
Samuel Jackson was in there, I think.
Right, and they were specifically referring to one of those buildings back in those areas behind the towers. The towers were attacked. That's a separate issue on how the buildings fell apart, thermite charges, and all this other stuff. And there's no way that those things affected some other building a block or 2 or 3 away. That's Building 7. And somebody made reference to the fact that no, that's where they were storing all of the secret JFK documents and who was actually involved with JFK's assassination, most of which a lot of these people were living today, except for the fact that George Herbert Walker Bush passed away not too long ago, and he was directly involved. And then I believe President Trump was going to extend it another 3 years. I'm thinking, my God, how long am I going to live before I get the truth? You know? And I'm 65. Jim Garrison, I had actually talked to Jim Garrison years ago, just before he died. He was on his deathbed. He was at the hospital. And I was talking to these people right around 2003, if I remember my dates right, because that's when I had my first heart attack after leaving the government. Within 5 years, I got the heart attack.
I think he died in 1992, just after the Oliver Stone movie.
Then I'm off. It was way before that because I had met with Maxine Waters in the 90s, then Ed Asner, and had to be right before. So I met with Ed Asner after that time frame. So it had to be during the 90s. But I got a phone call through him, through another person. That's him. And he told me to stay as healthy as I could. His children were our children were our best resources, because someday that they would be the ones to carry on and force the truth out to the American public about what we really did to our president or who did kill him. You know, and it's coming out. LBJ, even J. Edgar Hoover, Nixon was involved, the Murchisons, all these people, all these names that you probably heard before.
Yeah.
And yet they're covering up some of the biggest Texas-related names of a guy who was actually out of Connecticut, which was George Herbert Walker Bush. So
Right.
that's kind of Poppy Bush, and that's kind of scary if you think about the power plays, because even some of the people that we're going to talk about are surrounded at the White House by these people. There you go.
This is Clint Murchison, a guy that a lot of people might not even know about, but definitely involved in the JFK assassination.
Yeah. And you know stuff that we haven't even had a chance to talk about. I mean, you're a wealth of information, too, because you're very well read. You're probably one of the more intelligent people I've actually interviewed with in years. So there's a compliment.
Much, John.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't make it up unless it was true, and that's it. So, but with all these people that get into office, it concerns me, and I'm going back to when Ford was there, and he fell into place, and then I heard his tape recording on the radio here recently, just locally out of the L.A. or San Diego area. About this is we're how's the terms that we're going through the worst nightmare of our lives in this country or in history of this country, and that was Watergate. And he forgave and gave a pardon to President Nixon. And rumor is that every time that there's an outgoing president, that there's an automatic pardon for the president outgoing, no matter what happens. If the president incoming has to sign something,
whoa,
that's a rumor. That's
not true.
And I'll clarify this: Obama cannot give himself a pardon.
Correct.
You know about that comment?
Well, but also don't you have to be first convicted in order to receive a pardon, or how did this work with Nixon? Because Nixon wasn't actually convicted.
Correct. There's a pardon, and then there's a clemency, and then there's a they could vacate your sentence or vacate the case. Now, in my case, where I was accused of something once, they should vacate the case because it never happened. They violated the law. It was entrapment or something like that. In Nixon's case, if they impeached him like they impeached Bill Clinton,
yeah,
they still have to take it to the Senate and go through another procedure before they can get like what they would call a conviction. But by that time, the actual president could actually pardon him. But part of the condition of a pardon is, and this is what I don't like, it's kind of a misunderstanding, most people don't know it, is that technically you have to admit guilt to something. Well, look at Joe Arpaio. Joe Arpaio refused to abide by the part where they were checking the immigration status of people before they were going to jail, so therefore he could turn them over to Border Patrol and Immigration, which was the procedure that's been going on for many years. And a federal judge hit him up with a deal where he was going to put him in contempt. So technically Joe Arpaio was a contempt of court. Big deal. But that was a violation. So therefore he could say, yeah, I violated intentionally. I'm sorry. Please give me a pardon. And Trump gave him a pardon, and that was it. It was forgiven, erased. He never did a minute in jail or prison, and that was it. And he could have done up to 6 months or maybe even more for contempt. Now, and by the way, a lot of people don't understand is that Joe Arpaio's like 82 years old, and he's ex-DEA.
He's in good shape.
He's a federal agent from DEA, and people challenge him like, oh, he's just a country bumpkin sheriff somewhere. No, Joe's got a background. He's been trained. He's ex-DEA, just like a lot of other agents and law enforcement. Frank Serpico, a friend of mine, God bless him. You know, he was one of the first forerunners of whistleblowers. After that, it was Hanson Greenberg, the super cops out of New York PD. And
what did you think of the movie Serpico, John? Was that accurate to Frank Serpico's life?
Most of it was, yeah. I mean, I've talked to him. I've read the book.
He got shot in the face by cops.
That's true. No, he got shot in the face by a guy behind a door on a raid, and the cops didn't help him break the door open.
Oh, right.
So they specifically held back, and that's what they do. They won't be
Allow
there
him
in
to
time.
die.
That's right. They allowed him to get shot. He got his arm trapped. That was accurate in the movie. The guy shot him with a 22 Magnum or a 22. It hit him in the upper left-hand cheek bone area. It could have lodged into another part, but it blocked off because of the occipital bone and
Just
stuff
pure
like that.
luck that he wasn't killed.
Yeah, he had a partial paralysis and things like that. But Frank was also into martial arts, which is interesting. That guy was like some stuff I'd studied, and he's into that stuff. So he's into health. He doesn't, well, I think he smoked later, but that was like maybe a pipe or something. But he didn't smoke, didn't do drugs, very straight-laced, very clean. He had money, so he didn't need to take money, which was part of the thing that they tried to sell. And if you watch the way they treated him, it was very accurate. There was a few things that was, Hollywood.
Right.
In fact, in another movie where they were doing an accurate biography, he actually interrupted the movie where he'd say, "Hey, look, that's not how it happened." He will actually yell out, "Cut," right on scene, and the director, producers go, "Hey, what are you doing?" So that's not how it happened.
Yeah, but you can't call cut on set if you're not the director.
Exactly. You want to do your biography, you do it your way. This is my name, that's my life. You can't do it. And I'll say the same thing because Hollywood takes levities or liberties, and I've got friends in Hollywood and out of Hollywood that will tell you the same thing of how corrupt it is.
Right.
I'll quote Nick Mancuso, God bless him. He's over in Paris right now. He's American-Canadian born. He's been in a bunch of movies since, the 60s with Raquel Welch. He had a TV series called Sting. I got to get you to interview him sometime because he's a wealth of information. Let me
reel you back here to Gerald Ford and the whole business that went on between Nixon, Ford, what was going on with H.W. Bush at the time. So this is a photo that I really had never seen until after H.W.'s death. We've got Gerald Ford right here, H.W. Bush,
Look at
Barbara.
the connections.
Yeah, he's being sworn in as the head of the CIA right here.
Yeah, and look at the connections. Ford and some guy named Earl Warren were visiting a guy named Jack Rubenstein in Dallas jail back in '63. And then Nixon gets to be president and Ford's the vice president. And then right after that...
Well, no. Ford wasn't the vice president. It was that guy who he was already kicked out.
You're talking about Rockefeller.
No. Under Nixon, the vice president he had a really weird name. I can't believe I don't remember it right now. But he was under indictment, so there was no vice president. Then Nixon got in trouble. The chat will tell us the name of the guy who I'm thinking about right now that I can't think of. But they appointed Ford. He wasn't the vice president.
I'm thinking about Rockefeller.
Nixon's vice president was... Spiro Agnew.
Oh, Spiro Agnew. Yeah, he was out. Yeah, that was another one. And then after that, I believe it was Nelson Rockefeller. I'm going by who I protected, not necessarily by who was in the news, because we didn't read newspapers. We didn't see much of that stuff or trash on duty. If you did, you weren't doing your job, so you didn't have time to look at that stuff. See what I mean? So if you looked at it, it was late at night in the lunchroom for 30 minutes or whatever.
Oh, Rockefeller was Ford's vice president.
That's what I meant. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But yeah, look at the connections. It's just so unusual. If you look at the way these people are interrelated, and I'm almost thinking it's got nothing to do with whether one guy's a Republican, the other guy's a Democrat, and you got to wonder, well, maybe that's because the deep state is controlling everything.
Yeah. I think that might be true.
And maybe the guys in office don't have anything to do with it.
So you come on the Secret Service, you're 21, pretty young.
Oh, I was doing stuff before that. I was doing other undercover work before that, but that's another subject.
Right.
I had martial arts training. I was already speaking several languages. I was already studying since I was a kid. So, I mean, I was training myself as a kid, get good grades in school, be in sports, be able to do all kinds of stuff. I mean, I'm an Aries, so I guess that makes me a certain category of perfectionist, strong-headed, whatever, whatever the translation is. But yeah, very straight-laced. I mean, I didn't screw around. I didn't do drugs. I didn't do alcohol, and I didn't smoke. And if I told you something, I was a Cub Scout, and I was a Boy Scout. That ought to be the answer right there, right? Sort of.
Yeah.
so that kind of gives you a little bit of a profile. But, yeah, by the time I was out of college, I mean, I was ready to go to work. Easy.
Right. So you come on the Secret Service. Ford is the president. And what was your day-to-day like? What did you observe in terms of these power brokers and how they interacted with the president? And, did you ever have a feeling that the president wasn't actually in charge, or how did that all go?
Well, I saw some of that too. I worked at the Foreign Missions Division first. We're doing counterterrorism. Nixon just left. We're still getting threats from people like Carlos the Jackal. Okay. Munich. Think about Munich in '72 and all the OPEC ministers that I helped protect because of the oil and so forth. So that was Munich in '72. The
Israeli team got shot.
Yes, those people were all connected. So all these people were connected. They were trying to go after the OPEC ministers to control the oil. They were getting millions of dollars and extorting money for these groups. Black September, the Red Army, different factions, all kinds of factions. There's Carlos the Jackal, alias Ilyich Ramirez Sanchez, who's in prison, by the way, in France, Paris, France right now, still alive.
I didn't know he was still alive, and I didn't know he was Venezuelan.
Yes. In fact, if you get a movie, there's a movie I keep thinking about with Donald Sutherland and Aidan Quinn, The Double or something to that effect, and it's a really excellent movie. It's about him in that movie. It's a different angle, but it talks about how his background was and how he grew up in kind of a harsh environment. So you are what you eat, The Assignment. That's it. That's a good movie. I recommend it. It actually tells people that how you bring somebody up. This kid was abused by his father, brought up to eat oatmeal every day, so he was sick of it, and that's what they put him through this training. And then they started adding in all the special agent and the high secret agent training, memorizing things and how to shoot, and be an excellent shot. That's the same kind of training they put us in, was shooting every day till you're almost sick of it. I mean, we're talking to the point where you already passed all the books, you already did all that stuff, then you went to specialized training at Beltsville. This is when it was downtown D.C., and we were in the same building protecting John F. Kennedy's limousine that was in Dallas that day, which was in a three-story garage level in a special building on 1310 L Street, which is no longer there now.
What, you mean they had it sort of preserved there?
No, it was actually there. They took us on a tour one night, and we went down, and I got to look at it, touch it, lick it.
Why were they
keeping
it there?
Well, it was also like safekeeping, but on occasion, sometimes they used it, but it was already outdated.
Right.
So they kept it in protective custody, so to speak, until it was moved to another deal where they actually moved it to, I believe, maybe at one of the other museums. And I don't want to misspeak the actual location, because I was thinking it might have gone to the Ford Museum or one of the other ones, but it can be easily looked up. But by that time, it was already outdated on the updates. And they had the original color was blue, dark blue, and then they changed it to black, supposedly. But they also changed the windshield, which was damaged from the front, which proved that there were shots from the front, not from the back. Oswald never fired a shot that day. He's not the lone gunman. And Clint Hill, I was just talking to this other agent, and he and I were talking for, almost a whole hour on the first call. And that's really unusual. Clint Hill still thinks there was a lone gunman, but how could he? he was busy guarding Jackie.
So wait a minute. So you've spoken with Clint Hill, who was
no, I talked to another agent that was familiar and went back to the late 70s and 80s when I was there.
So for maybe people who might not realize, Clint Hill was the Secret Service agent who is seen crawling up on the rear deck of the car in the Zapruder film.
Right, and two of the other agents that are driving would be Kellerman, and I'm misspeaking the other guy's name, who were also present when Eisenhower was having some special meetings in Holloman Air Force Base or Edwards Air Force Base in the desert, which I'm kind of leaving that kind of secret, but that's a special in and of itself type of a thing. But it's interesting that those two agents were showing up in Dallas. Now, just before that limousine hit the curve to hit the Stemmons Freeway sign area, they were called off. The agents were pulled off.
Yeah. So Clint Hill probably didn't know all that much about what was going on. It was such a compartmentalized
of course.
thing. He didn't know anything more than anybody who was just watching the Zapruder film, right?
Yeah, and I was watching special DVDs that were put out even in the late 90s, early 2000, probably 2005 or 6. I actually got the best DVD, which was enhanced with all the stuff removed, and it showed the actual explosion at 313 right there. You notice I remembered
Clint Hill climb up on the back.
Yeah, he ran up to catch up on the back. Jackie was reaching back to scrape up which was probably part of a skull piece that had got blown off. And the other agents were still in the back. And there's all these other theories about all this other stuff, and those are ludicrous theories. Yeah, another guy had turned around and shot him from. No, that didn't happen. There was an M16 that the guys didn't. No, that didn't happen. James Files, a.k.a. Sutton, was allegedly either in a storm drain cover off the sidewalk near the Stemmons Freeway sign.
Well, he says he was behind the fence firing an XP-150.
That's correct, and I was going to say that next. And he just got out of prison not too long ago. I'm not sure if we discussed that or not, but he would not do a regular interview with somebody else on Skype, for instance. He had to do it through a girlfriend or something. I said, well, then how do you know you're talking to Sutton? James Files, same guy.
Right.
And he claims he was there. He bit the casing. He left it behind. He was with Trafficante and all these other guys. They had special compartments in these vehicles to hide their weapons, which is interesting because that's the same kind of compartments that we used to encounter at the border, you know, for smuggling guns and drugs. They still do it today. They've been doing it since the 30s and 40s when they would smuggle the rum runners, you know, when the booze, back in the day when they were smuggling booze and stuff. So nothing's changed as far as the mob and how they do. But I'm surprised this guy's still alive today.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Zbigniew.
Well, let's talk about some of these guys. Who did you encounter most frequently who we have alleged might have been the true power behind some of these presidencies? We've got
all of them.
Yeah,
all of them. If they were stationed at the White House, you've got Zbigniew Brzezinski under Carter. You have Henry Kissinger, who was there before that. He was the Secretary of State. After that, Dick Cheney took over that office as Department of Defense Secretary or whatever. And the agents that were on his detail, if I didn't mention it on another show, would be so nervous they were cocking their Uzis before they would go out in their special follow-up cars, which were like supposed to be like bulletproof station wagons, and he had a bulletproof car, but they were seriously afraid of getting hit. And we had bombs go off within blocks of the White House, 2 blocks, 3 blocks from where I was stationed at, which was walking distance to the Russian embassy. And I could feel the explosion from 3 blocks away. That means that people at the White House could feel the explosion, which was right next to the Russian embassy at the airfloat, which was also behind the famous Washington Post off of 15th Street. So it's interesting that, yeah, how come they didn't have that? And you don't hear it's publicized because it sort of disappears over time, and the fence jumpers that were shot and things like that.
So who set off that bomb?
The one, well, we think it was the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, because the Jewish they have their own extremists because they're going after people in Russia at that time. I'm trying to think of who was in charge, because even the Russian ambassadors were following orders.
Isn't that the Likud party that's now in charge of Israel?
Not sure. Maybe.
I know they did some terrorist stuff.
Okay, then that would be hand in hand. They would be like the extremists of their groups. And
I don't know that much about this, so I don't know if we should talk about it. We get another expert to join us and talk about that.
But when they have JDL attacking those guys, on the other hand, you got other people attacking the Israeli embassy in return. So you got all these factions going after the Israelis, people going after the Russians, people going after the Venezuelans at their embassy.
Right. This
was right around 74, 75, and that was also right upside the. I was standing post at the Egyptian embassy at either Sheridan Circle or DuPont Circle. I get them mixed up. And there's Embassy Row. Embassy Row is full of embassies. You know, you couldn't walk 10, 15 feet without being near or in front of an embassy, and you would see Secret Service guys there all the time. And we didn't have all the nice cruisers and stuff. Oh, there's some interesting. Look at that guy.
Yeah, when I Google
Dick Cheney,
1975, look who he's hanging out with, Donald Rumsfeld. So I think it's very interesting, John, for people who are watching us on YouTube and these other, digital video formats. The first I ever heard of these guys was on September 11th, but it's interesting to now go back and see how long these dudes were hanging out, scheming, and doing whatever they were doing. So what was Donald Rumsfeld up to back then when you were in the White House protecting Gerald Ford?
Well, he was the Secretary of Defense.
Rumsfeld
Yeah, Secretary of Defense. As far as I remember him, he was very good at what he was doing.
How
a
so?
lot of these, just by his mannerisms. I'm going on profiling now. When I profiled in U.S. Customs, I also profiled at Secret Service, which means I interviewed you, I looked at you straight in the eye, I watched to see if you were telling the truth or not, if there was any evasiveness or deception, like a human lie detector. And I did not see that kind of deception. But I do remember towards the end, he bailed out or resigned or he relinquished his position at some point. But that's because he was being honest about things. And things weren't going the way they were supposed to be going. But I don't know about him as much personally, other than I think he was probably an honest person, also caught up into the stuff. Well, I'm just talking about what I saw personally, that's all.
Well, let's talk about Donald Rumsfeld for a moment, because I didn't realize he was Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford. Of course, that was the same position he held under George W. I've always personally felt that George W. Bush, the second Bush president, was essentially a stand-in, and all of his father's friends, like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, were essentially running his presidency.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so Secretary of Defense, 75 to 77.
Right. And then again from 2001 until 2006, it's sort of like they brought back old Ironside. I think it's also important that we point out that Donald Rumsfeld was the CEO of Searle Pharmaceutical Corporation at the time that aspartame was introduced and approved by the Food and Drug Administration. There were a lot of crazy shenanigans that went on at the behest of Donald Rumsfeld with regard to the FDA and how that food additive was approved. People should go and look up Sweet Misery, which is a documentary about aspartame and how dangerous it is. Our viewers who are drinking Diet Coke and Diet Soda should be really careful and not consume that.
I used to drink Diet Pepsi for a few years, Diet Coke. I got off the Cokes and went to other type of things. In fact, I think it was the Annette Funicello, I think, had a severe reaction to the aspartame and the phenylcyclines or whatever, the artificial sweeteners. But as you just mentioned, the same connection that Dick Cheney with Halliburton companies. So they all have their little niche, and they try to get the millions of dollars that are put into these private companies. They're actually pulling the strings behind these private companies, and that's how they get their money in another legal way, so that when they retire out, they've already got millions and millions of dollars stacked up for their children and their heirs behind them.
Yeah,
it's
the revolving door.
It's like Jack Ford and Susan Ford and all these kids and Steve Ford from the Gerald Ford family, is that they were well taken care of. And if you go back, they try to brag about the fact that some of the presidents, like Jimmy Carter, are some of the most honest presidents, that they didn't benefit from their position. But yet a lot of the presidents that you look at in the past will end up retiring out, and they're millionaires. I mean, look at Obama. How many millions and millions? He gave away $158 billion with a B, Baker, and it's outrageous what he did when he sent that money to Iran. There's Jimmy, God bless him. He's the oldest living president. I have to throw that in there because somebody just barely mentioned his name on the tail end of a newscast, and I didn't catch it right because I was busy hearing something else. So I'm going on the internet right away. Jimmy Carter, president, just to make sure he didn't die on me, because I just sent him an email just the other day, and I didn't need that to happen. You know what I mean? Did you read my email, Jimmy?
Right.
But I was protecting Jimmy Carter, a man named Anwar Sadat, who was actually taller than I am, and I'm 6'3", and I'm shrinking a little bit, and a shorter guy, Menachem Begin.
Anwar Sadat was assassinated, wasn't he?
He was later assassinated in 1981.
I remember seeing it on TV. I was a little kid.
Yes.
I was pretty stunned by it.
Well, they were in a parade. There was a parade group, and some of the military guys who were Muslim extremists, we have to say Muslim extremists.
Well, it was Ayman al-Zawahiri and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad that did it.
Yes, you said the name so perfectly. I was looking at you. How did you do that? Did you say that? You act like a speaker. That's good. A normal speaker. But you could see pictures where some of these guys went right up there. They're shooting AK-47s.
And if I'm not mistaken, John, this landed al-Zawahiri in jail in Egypt, where he was later exiled from Egypt, and according to what we're told, Osama bin Laden urged him to come to Al-Qaeda, which means the base. So he's basically just summoning him to Afghanistan to merge the Egyptian Islamic Jihad with the Mujahideen Army of God to create what we now have heard of as Al-Qaeda. But Al-Qaeda really is just kind of like a marketing term created by U.S. News and the U.S. government to give us a boogeyman to be afraid of, right?
Yeah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the same stuff. I mean, if you think about it, how come that guy didn't get executed under their laws in Egypt?
Why? I don't know.
Well, because they let him stay alive. They look, if they exiled him, they might as well have sent him to Hawaii. It's the same difference, Then they pull him out and they use him somewhere else. So there's all these deals that go on behind the scenes. I'm afraid to say that the more money, if you get into the billions of dollars, even drug cartel guys, and I'll mention a guy named Carlos Lehder, Lehder, that guy, I think we talked about it before. I had information that showed he doesn't show up in the Bureau of Prisons. There you go. He doesn't show up in the actual Bureau of Prisons files. And somebody alleged that he got out years ago. There's right next to his other buddy that got killed.
Were these guys?
Escobar.
Oh, yes.
Pablo Escobar. Pablo's not a bad-looking guy, but when you put a mustache on him, he looks horrendous. Some of these guys look
cartel.
Exactly, the infamous Medellin cartel. And that's the George Young, J-U-N-G, that the movie Johnny Depp was in called Blow.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, they basically, if you look at some of these characters, the cartels were taking advantage of some of these guys in the fact that they were good movers and shakers. They could put the stuff out on the streets. And these guys were making millions and millions of dollars before it was really worth a lot of money. And now you're talking about billions of dollars. But what's interesting, and I have to tell you this, with all the money and the billions of dollars, even if it goes to the deep state and it goes to black budgets and it goes to all this stuff, where's it all going? What's the bottom line? Is it going to military defense? Is it going to top secret projects like UFOs and Area 51? Or is it going to some other fourth category that we don't know about? What's the bottom line? You can only.
What do you think?
Well, I'm going towards the Area 51 theory, and I do have some sources that will tell you that they've got some serious stuff going on behind the scenes, where if you think that Star Trek is science fiction, it's not.
But don't you think, John, there's a huge amount of money being just stolen? Like things like the Clinton Foundation are created to launder all this illegal money because there's just a huge hundreds of billions of dollars of worldwide black money market that needs money laundering of all kinds?
Yeah, and why haven't we had these people indicted? Why hasn't Hillary been indicted and all these other people? And she stole millions and millions of dollars when she was Secretary of State. And you don't just go into an agency and then walk away with billions or millions of dollars, okay? What's wrong with that picture? And it's like, why are they excluding them? What's wrong with that? So maybe Trump is allowing Mr. William Barr, you just brought his picture up, to catch up. But Whitaker resigned out at the same day. It's like, well, why did he resign? He was a good guy. He was acting interim. But maybe there's another connection there. You just brought up a picture.
Yeah, I'm fearful that maybe, William Barr is kind of bringing back the legacy of some of the guys that we have in our collage tonight, because, William Barr was pivotal in the pardoning of Caspar Weinberger and some of the guys that were connected to Iran-Contra, which, of course, Poppy Bush was the capo de tutti capos of that operation.
Oh, and while you've got that picture up, you have to see that movie with Tom Cruise, American Made.
Yeah, I've seen it.
The last 2 minutes, the very last minute or so, shows Reagan being questioned by people, news media in the Rose Garden, and it was Thanksgiving. They're dedicating a turkey.
Yeah.
And they asked him a question, and he passed over it. He ignored it because Reagan is not stupid. He was not stupid. He was very smart. And Bush was in the background, so they yelled out a question to him, and he kind of laughed, and he ignored it and walked the other way. That's how they do it. But Bush is more involved in stuff from way back, and it bothers me that if Trump didn't have his people in place properly and ready to embed the whole government, every time we get a new president, all the U.S. attorneys have to tender their resignation. So doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. They have to tender a resignation. They work at the pleasure of the president.
Well, they don't have to, but sometimes.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. It's a requirement.
I thought Bill Clinton was the first guy to fire all the U.S. attorneys.
No, that's not true.
Huh.
So if Trump decides, I'm going to keep this one guy, or I'm going to keep his staff, they're welcome to stay. Or if they're all Republicans, he can do that. But they have to tender a resignation. And that's it, because they have to do it. I still get job opening notices on my email for vacancies for U.S. attorneys. They're still doing it. We're already in the second, almost third year already. It takes a good 8 years before a good president is going to be able to adjust the mistakes of all the previous administrations. It's going to take a lot longer. And if these guys are connected in a bad way and Trump doesn't know what he's doing, and I'm suggesting that if he didn't do his homework for the past 20 years, and I believe he may have been doing his homework because he's had money, he's got his picture with all kinds of important people, then he even had a picture with that guy Roy Cohn.
Yeah, well, Roy Cohn is not such a nice guy.
No, that was interesting. I picked that up by mistake just a week ago, and I was going, wait a minute, I was looking up this other Cohn, and then when you pull up that Cohn, the Roy Cohn comes up, and there was a picture with him and Trump. I go, well, that's interesting because he was a terror as a U.S. attorney. But then again, Richard Nixon was back during the communist scare with Joseph McCarthy back in the 50s. So they were there you go. That's a later picture because Cohn was getting aged back at that point. But look
Looks
at
like a
Donald
rough
Trump.
character. I mean,
Well, yeah, he had a rough lifestyle, but I won't go into that necessarily on this station. But he was a very aggressive, harsh type of a guy that if you had him on your side, you were going to win every time. That's how good he was. I don't know about Giuliani or some of the other guys. Dershowitz, perfect, really good attorney. And every time Trump does something, he's always backed him up. There's Zbigniew.
so let's talk about him for a minute, because Zbigniew Brzezinski is a guy who really existed kind of behind the scenes. Not a lot of people know very much about him.
Now, you're familiar with the White House and the Oval Office. The Oval Office is a special area of the West Wing that's surrounded by Secret Service at every door and every exit and all that. And all that tete-a-tete action that happened with Bill Clinton and Monica was in the adjacent room called the Den.
Okay.
That's where the president has a toilet and a office, a wet bar, and a desk, and a little library. So he can go back in there, sit on a chair, kick his feet up, read a book, look at some reports, and yeah, you could pull up one of those. It's off to the right of that shelf.
Let's see if we can find another image of it here.
That's off to the back. If you go straight back, that's the door to the Den. But so one time, Jimmy Carter let Zbigniew Brzezinski borrow that desk in that office. I thought, why couldn't he let him use another office? Well, that was the only private area. So he allowed the news media to squeeze into that tiny little room, and I had to go in there and replace an agent because he had to go do something else or go wash his hands or something. And Zbigniew Brzezinski is literally holding up a top secret document, and I'll flip up a blank document here so you can see something. Just like that, and you could clearly see that it said top secret on it, and the media was taking a big wide-angle lens photograph, no different than I am from 3 feet away to you.
Huh. It seems kind of irresponsible, or like he wants someone to actually see it.
Or intentional. Yes,
right.
And I thought about that too, but I mentioned it to the agent that came back, who I knew, and I let it go at that. That room right there.
To what degree, John, would you say Zbigniew Brzezinski called the shots with Jimmy Carter? He was Secretary of State under Carter?
I believe so. His background goes back to Europe, Serbian, Russian, Ukrainian, stuff like that. He has an interesting idea about New World Order stuff. And
he's a total globalist. I mean, he wrote that whole book on the technocratic revolution or whatever.
And I wanted to mention, since you're tied in very well, you're well educated and well versed on globalists. I got some person actually said something about globalists in the same sentence with my name, and I said, you obviously don't know what a whistleblower is, you know.
Right.
But Zbigniew Brzezinski also mentioned, there you go, the Polish-American thing.
Yeah.
He has a daughter that's still around too.
Yeah,
but he
Mika
also,
Brzezinski, she's on the news. So he was the national security advisor under Carter.
That's it.
And he's very tied in with the Council on Foreign Relations, I think.
Now, I want to mention this because I want you to kind of bounce off on this one too, is he also believes in a certain amount of the world population to be terminated.
Right.
That's a globalist agenda.
Well, he's dead now, thankfully, but yes, I agree.
He just passed away about a year ago, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah, 2017. So there is this thing about that, but I can't see Jimmy Carter tying in with him. Jimmy Carter is the deacon. I said that for a reason. You know what the deacon is?
Not really.
He was actually a deacon of a church, but that's also his code name.
Oh, that's the secret security code name for him.
No, I didn't say that. I just deacon. But yeah, I used to remember all that stuff because you had to remember. Like Passkey was Gerald Ford, Pinafore was Betty Ford, and so forth. A lot of interesting names and code names and stuff. Reagan, he was Rawhide. And that was very
I've heard
well
that
done.
Hillary Clinton was commando.
She was called better and worse than that.
Oh, no, Evergreen. Evergreen. Her name was Evergreen, but someone told me a story about how on the radio they once said Evergreen is riding commando. She had no underwear on.
Yeah, that's the joke. Yeah, but yeah, I've heard her called much worse. By agents and stuff like that. But she doesn't like to have agents within 15 feet of her anyway. But I'm telling you right now, I know Jimmy Carter from a different perspective. I know Rosalind Carter. She's a Southern lady. I've dealt with her personally. I've dealt with him and Jody Powell, who was his press secretary. Hamilton Jordan, who was also another chief of staff, and so forth. I'm lucky to even remember some of these positions and names sometimes. But I believe him to be an honest person. And when he was misinformed about something, it's because they surround these people surround themselves around the president, and they encompass them. There you go. There's a nice fairly current photograph of Rosalind and Jimmy Carter, the longest living president. And I'm telling you, she's aged pretty well too. And I was 6'3". I think I shrunk a little bit, and she was tall, even in her own regular high heels. That when they were doing receptions and people were coming. In fact, I remember Jack. I screwed up. There goes. No, the actor Jack Nichols. Nichols. Mm-hmm. He cut line. He says he wasn't going to stand in line to shake hands with somebody after he waited so long, and he was a contributor. He was a Democrat, so he had a long ponytail at that time. So that would have been 1976, 77 when the election thing. So a lot of those actors would come out, and we were letting them find their way to the front fence and the gate so they could go out to Pennsylvania Avenue and leave. And a lot of these people would come through, get to say hello, I'm so-and-so. That would be your chance to slip them a business card or something, and I want to be considered for president or head of CIA director like one guy did, who actually did get picked up later.
Wait, an actor said he wanted to be the head of the CIA?
No, it was Turner, Stansfield Turner. Huh. And I won't mention who he gave his business card to, but that's when he was still with the Navy. He was a Navy, high-ranking Navy officer or a rear admiral or something. So when they go to these things, that's what they do. They get in there and they get in as quick as they can. There you go. Let me double check that. Oh, he just passed away last year, 2018.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I've been coming into contact with a bunch of people recently that I have this weird thing about looking somebody up, and they just passed away a couple of months ago.
So he was the director of the CIA just before Colby.
Exactly. If you
and right after H.W. Bush.
There you go. So I won't mention who got the business card.
Look at these guys, Frank Carlucci.
That sounds like an Italian from the mob.
He's the head of the Carlyle Group, which benefited tremendously financially after 9/11. And I do believe George H.W. Bush was on the board, so I don't really trust any of those guys.
You just did something very spectacular, and I have to point this out. A lot of people probably went in one ear or over their heads, but just by me fielding information to you and you double-checked a note, you just located another name.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It gives me tingles thinking about it. I tell you what, if we worked full-time and just did this all day long, we'll figure out the whole connection here. You'll get one of those spider web things on the internet thing where they show all the connections.
Right, link analysis, I think you're talking about. Well, we can do that, John.
Yes, I did that years ago, and I ran my own name, and they had names connected to people I had contacts with, because all it does basically is if you've got a website, it'll connect something that may be in your website, but there may be something to it.
Right.
No different.
We'll be doing this every week. Normally, I think we were doing it at like 5 o'clock on Fridays, and people are going to be able to tune in every week by going to your Patreon page, which is patreon.com/John_A_Carman. And people can go there and become financial sponsors of John. He, of course, served our country in a variety of ways, not only as a police officer, but as a member of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, and of course, as a member of the Secret Service. People can also see the show's simulcast on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So it's important that people sponsor the show and the guests that come on the show because, you know, John, the stuff that we talk about, you really can't monetize it on YouTube, and it's complicated when we start having guests, and I don't want to pay people to come on the show. So I think this is a really good system to have this type of micro sponsorship where the viewers can become monthly sponsors and help you and I carry on with doing this work. But I like the idea of integrating some kind of link analysis tool. You know, we're running out of time for today, so I want to try to talk a little bit more. Let's get into Dick Cheney, perhaps. When did you first see Dick Cheney hanging around the White House?
That's interesting. I was actually doing the sweeps where we do security checks after they leave the office the day. He's in the West Wing. He's got the front office. So whenever you see these guys coming out, and they came out of the West Wing and they want to do a stand-up presentation to the news media, that corner office to the far right of the West Wing at the front of the White House is where his office was. So if Henry Kissinger was in there, you could see him sitting there. You could see him sitting at his desk. Just same thing with Dick Cheney, but after 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, when he's gone home for the evening, unless some emergency happens, I had to escort the cleaning crew, the ladies with the big vacuum cleaners, and then after they left, I had to make sure nothing was touched. Then after that, we would seal off the door and lock it, and then technical security would come in. Then they would do their little bug sweeps to make sure that there's no other devices left behind, like a strange-looking pencil that has a device in it. You know, shades of man in like Flint back in the day.
Right.
Remember
Man
the
from
pencil?
Uncle. Yeah,
all that stuff. In fact, I probably told the story where he had a gift from the Fort Bragg from the Green Berets. I was talking to somebody else about this. He had an actual Bowie knife that was left on a plaque, and I go, wait a minute, that's an exposed weapon. It should be in a locked case, and it's not. Anybody could pick that thing up and use it. And I picked it up to examine it. I said, yeah, it's got to get reported, so I had to report it. I think he either had it removed or maybe they put a cover over it later, but these guys were all very friendly, very, very cordial. They all did their thing, but it's so complicated for the American public to understand the way the procedure is. Once they get these people into office, it drops down to another level to their staff, and then their staff to another group of people. And from that point on, probably, I don't even know if the analysis is even good to compare it, but it'd be like Watergate when Nixon had to trust Haldeman, and Haldeman got his guys down to G. Gordon Liddy. G. Gordon Liddy was a real tough guy. He still is, to my knowledge. And those are the kind of people that you need to actually do stuff that needs to get done, whatever needs to get done. But that was only like 2 or 3 or 4 levels from the president, which was very close. Back in the day, it was unusual to even be that close to the president, even from that level. These days, they probably have it so removed that you wouldn't even be able to track it back to them, you know. And he had a good book. If you read his book, G-Man, and there was another book where he actually talked about his fears, and the part that was in the movie about him putting his hand over a lit candle to prove his there you go, he's 88 years old.
Still alive. That's a surprise.
Oh, I saw him in San Diego. I went over to talk to him briefly. And as soon as I told him who I was, he immediately, we talked. I was going to go get my book and bring it back and have him autograph it, but he was doing that Silk Stocking television series, I think, back in early 80 to 90s, 80 to 90 something. But look at that.
Why did Jimmy Carter commute his sentence?
Okay, there's the other term. Pardon, vacated, and commuted means he stopped his sentence of 20 years and got him out of prison.
Yeah.
I actually remembered that he got out in less than 2 because a lot of the Watergate guys did get out in less than a couple of years.
Right.
So 8 years in prison, and if you read his book, is a real serious thing. And he had to survive these other people who really did deserve to be in prison, who were bad people, that murderers, robbers, rapists, you name it, and that sort of thing. I mean, this guy was a total gung-ho type of a guy from back in the J. Edgar Hoover days.
Yeah, well,
You know?
a lot of people think G. Gordon Liddy had some involvement in the JFK assassination, and certainly he was one of Nixon's plumbers. Wasn't he involved? I mean, that's why he went to jail, was the Watergate break-in.
Yeah, and the Watergate, which is interesting, actually did a detail protecting some Saudi prince right next to Barbara Streisand, and I ran into James Caan, who was picking her up for a Watergate presidential command performance by Gerald Ford. And I've studied this stuff too. I don't remember G. Gordon Liddy on the Dealey Plaza stuff very much at all. I'd have to refer you over to Robert Tosh Plumlee on an interview sometime, because Tosh Plumlee was CIA, and he flew planes and dope and stuff connected just like Barry Seal did. Then later he flips over and starts talking, "Oh, John, I was in Dallas that day." And I said, "You're kidding. I didn't know that." I was 10 years old in 63. So
Right.
that dates these people. They're a little bit older. They're a good 10 years older than I am. So at least I have an alibi. I was in school that day, right? At least that's the joke.
John, I think we still have a lot to talk about with regard to these guys. So perhaps we'll pick up next week and continue to hear more stories about the interactions. I think it's important for people to go back and look at these characters. You know, they want us to think it's ancient history and it's all, you know, what's the difference at this point? But when you start to look at these relationships and even the familial relationships with, you know, H.W. Bush and then W. Bush and the guys that were national security advisors and secretaries of state and all these different roles, the through line becomes incredibly clear. It's easy to see. But I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. I want to remind everybody to go over to your Patreon page, John. It's at patreon.com/John_A_Carman, and people can become sponsors of your page, and they're going to enjoy some exclusive videos that we've done with Ole, and perhaps there'll be more in the future. And of course, you're going to be posting all of the interviews that we do here. And I want to remind everybody that Crowdsource The Truth is a viewer-sponsored news resource. So if people enjoy watching the shows, it's really important that you become a sponsor. The channel is constantly under fire. So follow us on Twitter, get on Patreon, check out subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and just stay connected, because if anything happens to turn off any of the channels or you know, hit the Twitter account or anything like that, you want to be plugged into a few of these different things. John, anything you'd like to leave our viewers with before we close out for tonight?
Oh, you reminded me about that glitch where our transmission was interrupted an interview or two ago with Ollie and me. And I had to reboot my computer. But I keep looking at Reagan there, and I go, you know what? I believe he was an honest president. But I told you about the John Hinckley interview, and that other agent that I just talked to yesterday at length was confirming some information. And I think that that was a special case where they maintained Hinckley and used him. And that was under George Herbert Walker Bush, in my opinion. So that's another theory. But there was some other stuff going on behind the scenes. I mean, it's just, you can't go to Washington and not rub up against these things.
Right. Well, maybe in the future we'll have an opportunity to invite some of these guys on the show, and we can have some guests and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Could be cool.
Definitely. Definitely.
All right, John. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I hope you're feeling well. I hope people will go to patreon.com/John_A_Carman and sponsor John. And we'll see you next week, John.
Good to see you again. Take care.
Thanks very much. And good night, everybody.